Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I just wanted to talk about some of the books that I've been reading this week. And it's been a fun reading week. It's been a nice set of books, but a few interesting, balmy, off the wall kind of ones. So excited to talk about those here today. So let's get started. First up, a book that's a little bit different, perhaps, from some of what I typically read. England on Fire, A Visual Journey Through Albion's Psychic Landscape. And this is by Stephen Ellcock and Matt Osman. And what it is a sort of selection of pieces of art, whether sort of photography, portraits, other bits and bobs from across history. And particularly looking at England and its landscape and various other things about England told through art. And at first this seems like it might be kind of inaccessible and might be a bit difficult and a bit weird. But I remember basically I saw this in a bookshop once, I think in Foyles actually, and was just like, oh, okay, this looks interesting. Essentially the core idea is that they will pick a piece of art, or they pick a theme rather, and then tell that story of England through artwork. So for example, one about landscape, and it'll look specifically out at kind of landscape. One that might look at, for example, wilderness, or in water or visions or stones or whatever, and sort of tell the history of England particularly through that. And it's just such an interesting thing. It's not a book with tons of words per se, but so many pictures and such an interesting way of looking at the world that I just really enjoyed it as a sort of almost like a coffee table sort of style book really as well. But I think it also stands up to kind of just sitting with and really taking it in. Next up, a collection of short stories called Parallel Hells by Leon Craig, and I'm reading this for a book club. It's a book that's really quite wild. Some very odd short stories. I still don't fully know how I feel about the book in general, because it's got quite a lot of, just sort of very odd stories. For example, a lot of some of the short stories I find almost finish before I've really worked out what's going on, which is sometimes in a really good way, sometimes in less of a good way perhaps for me. But, you know, sort of think kind of gothic, queer short stories that play around a bit with body horror and with ideas around, kind of queerness and horror and kind of overlapping things of that. So it's a really weird and interesting book, and I don't really know what more to say really. Some of the short stories are disturbing. Some of them are more kind of playing around with sort of tropes and ideas. But there's something really refreshing, I think, in some ways about seeing the way that this book kind of owns both sides of that. It kind of is very clearly sort of horror and kind of gothic inspired. And it's also very clearly kind of part of kind of queer literature. And it sort of marries them together well. They're kind of two sort of genres or types of fiction, I guess, that have, or themes that have kind of gone together quite naturally quite a lot of the time. And it's just quite disturbing in places as well. Next up, I read Helen Oyeyemi's Parasol Against the Axe. And the reason I'm sort of giggling is, I guess, a little bit because I'm realising this week has just been full of books that are just sort of slightly brain-melting. Parasol Against the Axe, where to begin? So I've read another book by her before, Pieces, which I won't claim to really have understood, but I enjoyed. It was a lot about trains, and I kind of lost what was going on. Parasol Against the Axe largely is around, ostensibly around a hen party, and ostensibly around Prague, the city. And the two sort of coincide, but what often happens quite a lot throughout the book is that we look at kind of that kind of almost classic trope thing of the city becoming a character. So Prague is almost this kind of character where we look through the history of what's gone on there, and how that kind of shapes various things. So there's a sort of a passage about synagogues, and there's a passage about various people moving through the world and all these sorts of things. And in many ways, there are lots of passages of this where I don't really know what was happening, but just enjoyed the journey. So a character will start talking a lot about an historical figure or about some random guy, and they're both kind of given equal weight in this narrative. But there's something utterly compelling about the way this book moves. I don't really know what I'm reading half the time with this book, but there's something really compelling about the way that it is so sold on its vision, and it has just such a presence that is really quite fun and quite captivating. I kind of feel like I jump back into this book and find out a little bit more about some random character and just kind of enjoy the slightly off-kilter, slightly balmy tone to it that allows characters to sort of move around and be things and do things and then suddenly change on a dime. And in many ways it sort of has this sort of almost parable-like feeling of what does it look like to be a city? What is it if you are a, you know, to have this sort of world-renowned city that's been at the sort of heart of lots of history? What does that, you know, like Prague is this sort of odd, weird cousin almost in some ways. It's this kind of, it's a very odd book, but I kind of really enjoyed it, and I can't really tell you why or what the book was even about in some ways. There's just a really confident narrative propelling it forward to talk about it. And at some point we get, for example, like a local Facebook group of or like WhatsApp group of people who live in the area, and then one character who sort of wants to put random things in and talk about other things, and seemingly that's too real for the people who live there. And some people in this group are really angry that they've said something that's negative about the city. Other people seem to enjoy being able to just constantly drag the city down. So there's this sort of weird, dark humor to this book all the way through, but I don't really know what I was reading. It's great. But also I don't really understand it. And this is, in fairness, what I had from her last book. I mean, it's also what I often feel with writers like Isabel Weidner, where I don't really know what's happening, but I'm here for the ride because I just think there's something really exciting about what the book is doing. On a very different note to that entirely, by The Hidden Culture, History and Science of Bisexuality by Julia Shaw. And so this is a non-fiction book, basically looking, exactly as that subtitle says, at this kind of history of bisexuality. And it kind of takes several different forms. So it looks as bisexuality within a sort of scientific basis, so looking at various animals, looking at kind of humans and what bisexuality can look like there. And it also looks at various other things about sort of culturally what that stood up as. So sort of societally and sociologically and culturally, how often bisexual people are treated as sort of being a kind of halfway house, not my words, halfway house of kind of queerness or straightness. And so, you know, the kind of idea that they face discrimination from both sides of that, you know, some gay people will say that they're not doing it correctly or they should make up their minds, and some straight people saying that they're just sort of on the path to being gay or whatever. And so it kind of explores that. And particularly what I think I really appreciated about this book is the way that it really kind of tries to examine where that's come from in a relatively sort of shame-free way. It kind of just looks at, actually, people have often thought these things. Isn't that interesting? Let's explore that further. But also it looks a lot at bi men, and bi men are sort of often left out of quite a lot of conversations around bisexuality. And I think it does a really great job of kind of talking quite in depth about a lot of this. And it's also just quite funny and quite silly and quite irreverent and fun and playful, as well as dealing with some more serious topics as well. So I think I found this just really interesting. And I think it does a really good job of really exploring bisexuality in a really rational and logical and exploratory and fun way as well. So those have been the books that I've read this week. I hope you are doing really well. I hope you've had a good reading week and a good week more broadly. We are also very much in prize season. You know, the Women's Prize long list has just been, for fiction, has just been, has come out this week. The International Booker is about to come out the day after this video goes live. The women's non-fiction list is out and is something I'm sort of planning on reading a bit through. Just lots and lots of things going on, which is very exciting. But anyway, I hope you are keeping very, very well. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.